9:30, and I'll call the meeting to order. And the first item of business is adoption of the agenda, moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that the agenda be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with the agenda? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Minutes, moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that the minutes from the October 18th, 2023 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with those minutes? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We have nobody submitted for a public comment period. We have no public meetings or drainage meetings. We have one timed item at 9:30. So until we get to 9:30, we will jump down. Oh, it is 9:30 now, sorry. I'm back, I'm still back, like, yeah. Sorry, apologies. So, but it's not Tony Heimers, it will be Mike Salminen, presenting on behalf of the OPP. And did somebody check if that mic was working for you? Okay, because we can hear you in here, but they won't hear you on YouTube if that mic isn't on. And I will then turn it over to you, Mike, to make your presentation to council before I ask for questions. Also, I would suggest you don't need to read it to us. Assume they've read it. If they haven't read it, it's their fault. So you highlight whatever you want to highlight for us, and I'll ask them for questions.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll just go through month by month. There's the report, as the council knows, is broken down into sort of 3 sections. So I'll go month by month, each section at a time. We'll go through actual crime-related stats. You can see there, so January we had 2 violent crime related stats, 10 for property crime, 0 for drug crime. Our clearance rate for that month was 7.7%. In February, 1 violent crime, property crime was 11, and drug crime was again 0. Our clearance rate for that month was 21.4%. March is for violent crime was 6, property crime would be 16, and drug crime is 0 once again. And please stop me or slow me down, or if there's any questions along the way. In March, our clearance rate was 20.8%. Violent crime in April, actual crime was 0, property crime 11, and drug crime again was 0. Clearance rate for that month was 28.6%. In May, violent crime was 7, property crime was 12, and drug crime was 1. Clearance rate for that month was 38.1%. In June, violent crime was 1, property crime was 11, and drug crime for that month was 0. Clearance rates for that month was 15.4%. Violent crime for July, 2, property crime being 17, and drug crime again being 0. July clearance rates were 31.6%. In August, violent crime was 4, property crime being 16, and drug crime being 1, and the clearance rates for that month were 31.8%. In September, violent crime being 2, property crime being 22, and drug crime being 0. Clearance rates for that month were 25.0%. We'll move into the second portion of the report, which is in relation to motor vehicle collisions. In January, we had 16 total collisions and 4 personal injury for that month. In February, we had 9 total collisions, no personal injury. In March, we had 10 total collisions, 1 personal injury, and unfortunately we had 1 fatality collision on March the 16th where 2 individuals passed away within that collision. On April, we had 6 total collisions with 1 personal injury. In May, 17 total collisions with 5 personal injury. In June, 10 with 1 personal injury. In July, we had 9 with no personal injury. In 12 in August with 1 personal injury. And in September, we had 11 total collisions with no personal injuries in that month. The third portion of the report is in relation to statistics and charges in relation to provincial offense notices. In January, We had 80 total charges within the municipality, 2 impaired driving charges, 50 speeding charges, 5 distracted driving charges, and just highlighting 6 non-traffic criminal code-related charges, and 12 non-moving violations as well. And just of note, a new stat that you'll see on these reports is you'll see warnings at the bottom there. So these are officially documented warnings that the drivers will get an actual documentation from the officer, and it's logged into our system. So the next officer that stops somebody will be able to see that that individual actually got a warning. In February, you'll notice 5 impaired charges from that month, 10 speeding charges, and a total of 38 charges for that month. In March, again, 6 impaired charges within the municipality for that month, 14 non-moving violations, and 57 total charges for that month. In April, again, 8 impaired charges for that month within the municipality, 26 non-moving violations, and 19 speeding charges with a total of 64 charges for that month. In May, once again, 6 impaired charges, 12 non-moving violations, and a total of 68 charges for that month, with an additional 32 warnings. In June, 2 impaired charges, and a total of 44 charges for that month, with an additional 33 warnings. 3 impaired charges in the month of July, with an additional 17 non-traffic related criminal code charges, and a total of 44 charges with an additional 18 warnings. In August, 8 impaired charges, with an additional 27 non-traffic related criminal code charges, 86 total charges for that month, and an additional 23 warnings. And in September, 62 speeding charges with an additional 2 impaired charges and 20 non-traffic related criminal code charges, for a total of 107 charges for that month, with an additional 43 warnings handed out. Subject to any questions?
Thank you. Questions from council on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks for the report. First of all, going back to the criminal part, the first part of your report, are those incidents reported or are those charges laid?
Those are actual crimes that have occurred, so they wouldn't be representative of the number of calls for service or charges. It wouldn't represent either of those. It would just represent actual crime that has occurred.
Okay, so it's, what's the difference between an actual crime that's occurred
So
and
you
an
may get a
incident
call
reported?
for service. You may get a call for service that we determine is not actually that actual crime that has occurred. It may come in that way. It may be investigated that way, but for many reasons it's determined that it's not actually a violent crime.
So it's not actually, okay. Okay, that's interesting that there's that third category that
Yeah.
hadn't really thought of. If you listen to social media, crime is out of control in Zorra Township. The statistics say otherwise. Violent crimes, I wrote down incidents, but as you said, their occurrences, I guess is a better word for it, went from 23 to 25, and property crime went from 163 to down to 126. So are those numbers representative of other municipalities that are similar to Zorra, rural, small urban makeup, or are we above or below the typical?
So just to narrow the focus of your question, are you asking for across province or across the county? Because I could probably speak to the county. I don't know if I'd be able to speak to the province.
Around the county, if that's if you can give
I would say it's right in line with what we're seeing in other areas around the county. I can name them all, but within the county we're seeing the same trends. Zorra is not any different than any of the other municipalities around.
So we're no better, no worse than the other rural municipalities. My other question has to do with the speed, or the traffic part of the report, and I noted that speeding tickets, for 7 of the 9 months, if you average the total speeding tickets handed out, it was 15 per month, ranging from 8 to 24. But in January, there were 50, in September, there were 62. So were in there those months where there anti-speeding blitzes put on, and if so, can you tell us where those occurred, which roads were targeted?
So in the month of September, we take part in the provincial traffic campaign for the Labor Day long weekend, and that's across the province. So you see a heavy increase in traffic enforcement during that month, where it's not just Oxford County members, you'll have other outside members coming into the county in order to support that traffic initiative. Which roads, I wouldn't really be able to speak to that. There's no particular roads that are targeted during that campaign. The officers will patrol your municipality and handle infractions as they see fit. That being said, if there was speed data that came from the municipality that we could analyze and determine whether or not a focus patrol was, if there was areas within the municipality that you wanted focused, we would look for data from the county or from the municipalities in order to support that.
Okay, thanks for the information, appreciate it.
Anyone else? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, looking at the numbers from, I guess, last year to this year, it's hard to look at any kind of trends. I assume you guys have data going back multiple years past that as well to analyze. I know from a separate report that I was reading in this agenda that our township has about 10 or more % increase in population over the last 5 years. So in comparison to something like that, like how does the OPP use this data in terms of seeing trends? And you spoke to Paul's question about trends within the county overall, and how do you use that to sort of target prevention, or like what do you guys use that for, both in prevention and increasing staffing levels?
Well, as far as the increasing staffing levels, there is a project on the go in relation to a review of staffing based on what's called a service delivery model, and it's something that's ongoing right now. As far as the trends go, we use our regional analysts on a regular basis to assist us in determining trends, where we can focus our staffing, whether that be traffic or crime related, along with our specialty units as well. So we use that data on a regular basis in order to focus our resources in the problem areas.
Any other questions? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
And now we will go to reports from staff. 8.1 Fire Department, Report 2023-127 from the Fire Chief regarding monthly fire report for October. Chief, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Good morning. A couple things to highlight this morning. I wanted to speak about the flow testing that was done on the new public works cistern. It was tested in flowing 5,300 liters per minute, and I just wanted to share that it does make an excellent water source for that area of the municipality, and will serve our community really, really well. So we were happy to see those results and complete that testing. Fire prevention week occurred in October, and all 3 stations each took on a school and visited and provided fire safety education to over 600 K-3 students, which I think was probably the highest number to date as our community grows. And the other piece that I think is important to highlight is we successfully delivered a learning contract. I know I'd been sharing about it in each of my reports as we started into it and prepared for it. But 10 Zorra firefighters from not just one station participated in it and were successful in completing the training and applying for AS&E certification. They wrote their test and did their practical testing. And for some of those firefighters participating, this would have been their first NFPA course that they took. Many of them were grandfathered. We had a firefighter 31 years on, and this was their first time doing this. And I think it's something we should be really proud of for them taking that on and giving it a try. And then the last one, we had a multi-station training. This one was a water ice rescue team, so we incorporated our team, members from all 3 stations, and we also brought St. Mary's in and Upper Thames to be able to kind of dovetail a lot of those different services in, look at a unique section of Zorra Township, borrow some equipment, build in all those safety pieces, and really deploy our resources with that new water rescue trailer and test some of our response protocols. Those are the big things. Thanks.
Thanks, Chief. Questions from council on the report? Deputy Mayor Greg.
I just have a comment for you in relation to the fire prevention, public education, and community involvement. And I'm making it personal, which I shouldn't be, but here we are. So I have a son who's almost 5, came home from school, really excited. Mom, there was a big fire truck at school. I saw firefighters. And that was really great. And that's an exciting piece. And when this is in the report, we know that's part of it. And it's an exciting, feel-good thing for whatever. As time has gone on, not that day, not the following day, but in the weeks to come, we were reheating some food for him in the microwave, and he said, Mom and Dad, make sure you don't put metal in the microwave, it can start a fire. And I said, how did you know about that? And he explained what happened in the school. The following week, he said, what is our address? So 168 George Street. He said, I need to know that because if there's an emergency, I need to know what my address is. So we're always grateful to our firefighters that show up and do this important public education in our schools. It's really exciting to show up to the school in the morning and see the fire truck out front. But I think, we know that education is why we do this, but to have a 4-year-old have that education piece really resonate with him in a way that is going to actually help keep him safer in the community. If you can extend some thanks on the work that our firefighters do in the community.
Anyone else? Just a comment from me. I also know not to put metal in the microwave, but that's not my comment. Yeah. Well, inside. For I think some of the firefighters were writing their NFPA test the night that I was there, the recruitment night, and both nights, in fact, I think, right? And I know some of them were quite nervous about doing it, understandably, right? Who isn't nervous about writing an exam? But especially for the firefighters who have been on the force for a while, I think, first of all, congratulations from council, I'll pass that on. But more importantly, I think thank you, because that's the point in somebody's career in which they might say, you know what, maybe I'm going to walk away from this now. Like I've done my part, but maybe at the point at which I have to start writing exams, maybe this isn't for me anymore. So for those people who chose to, no, I am going to write it, I'm going to keep going, I think they deserve a special thanks for putting in, what for them is now increased effort compared to their time on the force before, and an effort in a different way than they've done before. So please pass on those thanks to all of them for making that effort, and congratulations. So thank you. Anybody else? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2023-127 from the fire chief be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Recreation Department, 2 reports. 8.2A, report 2023-129 from the Recreation Programs and Services Coordinator regarding October 2023 Recreation Monthly Report. Michelle, is there anything you want to highlight in that report before I ask for questions?
Good morning, everyone. Just a couple of things. The playground RFP, that report should be before council at the next meeting. And then on the programming side, we're excited to be looking at some opportunities there to bring more programming to the Township of Zorra. So more to come on that. Thank you.
Questions from council on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
Part-time staff, how many part-time staff have been hired for the winter, and is that in line with what we've hired in the past?
I don't know the exact figures. I do believe that I think Ali had provided some information to you yesterday about that. I can find out. But yes, it's in line with what had been previously done.
Okay. The clothing, is that just for the new part-time staff, or are we rebranding all of our recreation staff?
It's for everyone, so part-time and full-time, so that there's a uniform look to everyone. That just gives us an opportunity. I think sometimes the clothes can get a little worn, so we want to make sure that everyone has up-to-date clothing.
Okay, so all customers know who's staff and who's not staff, and they look neat and clean.
Correct. Yeah, there's staff on the backs of the coats and the sweatshirts, so they're quite visible.
Which follows up my next question. Do they have their names on the front, or do they wear name tags?
No, they don't. We've been doing some research in terms of that, and sometimes that personal information. It may not be necessary. If a resident has a complaint or concern about a staff member, we can certainly follow up based on the description and who's on that night in terms of staffing.
Okay. That's an interesting comment, because I always found that part of customer service is that personal relationship, and first part of that is knowing the name of the other person. And a lot of businesses do make a point of wearing name tags or having the person's name embroidered, so I'm just interested on your input on that. No, that's it for the report.
Anyone else on the report? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just a quick question. When I look at the hours rented, I mean, they seem to be a little bit down in Thamesford, a little bit up in Embro. We had discussion, excuse me, a couple months ago about outside teams or clubs being able to use it. And there was a discussion about the Wildcats coming in. I was just wondering, and I've seen lots of posts about available ice time and that kind of thing. How have you been getting, what kind of response have we been getting from either just private people or outside clubs in coming in and using that ice?
Yeah, with respect to ice, we're getting a really good uptake in terms of that ice that's available. So we're getting to the point where we don't have available ice during those prime time hours, which is good.
Anyone else? Questions on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-129 from the Recreation Programs and Services Coordinator be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried.
Marcus? I have
Sorry.
a non-report question.
Sorry, Paul. Go ahead.
Just what was the response last week? There was 2 meet and greet events at the 2 community centers. What was the response to that?
We were actually really pleased with the turnout in Embro. We had a couple of key individuals from community groups that came out, so that gave us the opportunity to discuss certain matters with them. The meet and greet in Thamesford was a bit better attended. We probably had about 6 or 7 key individuals from different service clubs and organizations. So we thought it was beneficial. We thought it was a good event. We're going to reach out to those other groups and associations that weren't represented to have a one-on-one meeting with them.
So not a huge turnout from the general public, but you got to talk to the key people that
did.
rent a lot
We
of the
did.
ice and
Yeah.
halls. Okay,
Yeah,
good,
that's great.
thank you.
Thanks.
And 8.2B, report 2023-139 from the Acting Director of Recreation and Facilities regarding summer day camp and pool year-end reports. Michelle, is there anything in there you want to highlight for council?
No, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from council on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
I know I repeat myself every year, but I'm always so glad that these 2 reports come from the people on the ground that actually do the work, because I think you get a better picture of what actually happened over the summer. And the other thing I really like about these reports is they not only tell you what happened, but they have really good ideas about how things could be improved for the next year. So I like I say, I'm glad that that's the way these reports are done. In the pool report, there's a statement in there that said that there's lots of participants in the swimming classes, but percentage skewed by large class sizes. So is the way to address that by trying to increase the number of participants, or should we make the size of the classes smaller and possibly reduce the amount of staffing that's required by that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Staff, we're looking at analyzing that in preparation for the next summer camp. What we know is that we're legislated in terms of how many lifeguards we need in terms of that ratio with the swimmers, and so we're going to reach out to other municipalities to see what's working for them, to see if we can apply some of those ratios and those class sizes. So more to come on that as we obtain more information.
Okay. And my other question was, I noted that the pool was closed at 4 o'clock on Saturdays, and I just wonder why that is.
We did too, actually. Apparently it's past practice, but that doesn't mean that needs to continue. I know that Ally is looking at different programs such as birthday parties, which would enable us to offer hours like over and above 4 p.m. Again, it's going to be subject to availability of staff, but that's something that we're looking at.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is pool is a very expensive thing to operate, and it's only open for what, 2.5 months of the year. We need to maximize the revenue time and the availability to the public, that it's there for those few short summer months. So
Yeah,
if there's
exactly.
a way we can do that by expanding the Saturday afternoon, evening times, it's well worth looking at, so thank you.
Any other questions on the report? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch. The report 2023-139 from the Acting Director of Recreation and Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thanks, Michelle. And 8.3, Building and Drainage Department, report 2023-138 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent regarding monthly departmental activities. Mike, is there anything you want to highlight in that report before I ask council for questions?
I'll just highlight under permits issued ARUs, accessory residential units, as they are starting to become a thing, and we are working on a couple basement ARUs.
Questions from council on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
Just one question, Mike, and I noticed in the last 2 years, permits issues have dropped from 287 to 183. Compared to 2022, the number of permits issued is down 19%, but permit fees are up 69.5%. Is that change entirely due to the new fee schedule that we adopted, or are there other factors, different types of permits or whatever that are in there?
Nope, that's mostly because of the fee increase.
Okay. So to follow up on that, I was hesitant about increasing his fees as much as we did, but in hindsight, it's a good thing we did to keep the building department in a financially sound position, considering the decline.
Any other questions? Councilor Stewart.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment on the ARUs. Mike kind of brought it up there. Just looking at that, it's interesting to me where we have 2 new single detached dwellings. Obviously, that could be 2 new homes for someone, but that's costing around $475,000 apiece. And here, someone's choosing to take space that they have available, spend, let's say, an average of $35,000, and create 2 more housing units in the town. So I just thought that was worth highlighting for sure.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Councilor Mitchell.
Just a comment, and that's looking over the last 2 years, permits went from 287 to 183. New houses went from 89 to 30, which is an indication of a slowdown in the building industry countrywide. 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, it's kind of the canary in the cage situation. When the building industry suffers, it's an indication that the economy overall, especially the way Canadian economy is based on construction, that the entire economy is suffering. And the canary hasn't died yet, but it's certainly got a cold or a bad cough based on these numbers. The other point is, last year when we set our budget and our tax levy, it ended up that the average taxpayer wasn't as impacted on a percentage increase because we had significant growth in new construction. And according to these figures, we're not going to have that same buffer built into whatever our final budget decisions are this year, because we don't have the same amount of new construction, new taxpayers paying in. So just a couple points that I always look at those numbers that Mike and Nicole provide us, and that's my reading of it. So.
Anyone else? Yeah, I think on ARUs, full disclosure, in preparation for the meeting yesterday, I completely missed the line in that report about ARUs. Further to Kevin's point, I think what's really interesting is 2 single detached dwellings and 2 ARUs, and the reality is without the ARU policy, those would just not be residentially, like those people weren't, if I can't build an ARU, I'll build one of those single detached, that was just not going to happen, right? Those are housing units that simply would not have happened otherwise, right? The other thing I think that bears reminding for people is I frequently hear from residents about ARUs and stuff that the province is making us do. And that's simply not true. The province has made municipalities do that, but Zorra and Oxford were already pursuing ARU policies before the province mandated that it be done. So I think in that context, it's just important that this council and our area municipal partners take credit for that line happening, because if the province hadn't made us do it, we were going to be proposing to do it anyway. So those two units are, obviously to those residents credit, but also to this council and our relationship with Oxford County and permitting that kind of thing to happen, because it was going to happen anyway. Anyone else? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that reports 2023-138 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thanks, Mike. And 8.4, Public Works Department Report 2023-136 from the Director of Public Works regarding a Public Works monthly departmental report. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight for council in there?
A few just quick highlights. The bridge culvert 26 on the 29th line, Public Works staff were able to visit the site this morning to get a most up-to-date what's happening there. So things are progressing really well there. Forms are coming off the day. Next week they're planning on putting on the waterproof wrap, reroute the river through the culvert, and then start backfilling. So they are at very least on schedule, if not maybe a little bit ahead. So with good weather, we should be able to open that road by the November 30th deadline. The ZMF, a quick update on there. All the heating system, as I said in the report, are up and running. There are some relay issues with a couple of the heat pumps and a seal issue with one of the circulation pumps. However, those are being dealt with by the supplier and hopefully be taken care of soon. And then one final update on the Cobble Hills and Road 74 intersection study. Recommendations did come to staff yesterday, so between Zorra and Temp Center staff will be reviewing them, and they'll be the recommendations will be brought to the next council meeting. That's all I have.
Questions from staff? Questions from council on the report? Deputy Mayor Grady.
In regards to the Cobble Hills and Road 74 intersection, so first a couple of comments, but I do have a question. We talk all the time about, complex, county roads, township roads, different staff, different policies. Now this is even further complicated by a different municipality. But residents don't experience their daily life that way. They're just, driving and want safe driving environments. So I think, seeing this collaborative work that involves many different moving pieces, it's great to see, because this is how we're able to deliver the service to residents that they're looking for. We all have tools in terms of dealing with situations, and it looks like this is a case of exhausting some of our tools and then needing to go to outside resources to ensure that we're getting the right solution moving forward. The question I have is, have we used an outside consultant in the past in terms of further analysis of a site that the data is showing is still problematic, but we've exhausted some of our tools, or is this the first time that we're initiating something like this?
No, that's a good question. We have used outside resources for data collection on problem intersections before. The intersection of 31st line and 74, we had a study done on that one as well a few years ago, and recommendations were to put the flashing beacon above that intersection, and that's what was implemented.
Any other questions on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
Steve, now that you've fully moved into the new ZMF, what's the plan for the old Embro shop for this winter, and specifically, are you heating it?
Yeah, so obviously, everything's moved out of that shop now. All the equipment's gone. Obviously, there's no staff in there, so we've had the Oxford County, we contacted them, and they took care of shutting the water supply off at the curb. Public Works staff have drained all the interior water lines and winterized the toilet P-traps, so our plan is to fully, completely shut off the heat there for the winter.
Okay.
we will continue to have hydro in there to keep the lights on and keep the security system all in operation. But as far as heat, we're planning on shutting it down.
So there'll be some savings on that?
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay. And the other question is about the rail crossing repairs. How much lead time do you get notification from either CN or CP about when they're going to do this work and when we're going to get a bill for it? And how do you budget that if you don't get much lead time?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's, the communication could be much better from rail companies. We don't get too much notice on these things that definitely don't have the opportunity to include it in the budget. So they do offer payment plans if we can't handle it or find it from reserves and reflect that in the following budget year. Yeah, there would be some, such as our boundary agreements with other municipalities, we have it in those boundary agreements that we do give each municipality, planned projects at least 1 year notice so they can plan for them as well and fit them into their budgets. We don't see that same kind of communication, unfortunately, from the rail companies.
And a comment back to what we were talking about Cobble Hills Road, and I drive Cobble Hills Road a lot when I'm delivering fertilizer. It's a real problem because it's narrow, it's bumpy, a lot of areas are hilly with poor visibility, but it's a direct route coming out of the factories road in St. Mary's, and a lot of people take it, they'll end up on especially trucks. It's a fairly direct route to the 401 interchange at Dorchester, so there's a lot of truck traffic on. So I know in the future, we're looking at more work on Cobble Hills Road. It's going to be expensive because it's a long stretch and there's a lot of work to be done there, and we do have to coordinate with Tim Center. The problem is that residents that are not happy with it now will probably be less happy when it becomes less bumpy, wider, and better visibility because the speed and the truck traffic is going to both increase. Cobble Hills Road is a long-term problem that needs to be addressed at some point.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that seems to be the way when, especially right after a road's been rebuilt or resurfaced, uptick in speed and traffic volumes are always the next issue we have to sometimes deal with.
Anyone else on the report? Question for me, I think maybe a little bit for Steve, maybe a little bit for Diane, Don. Now that the ZMF is up and running and our staff are all moved into it, and that's where we're operating out of, when can council expect to see the report that's been discussed before on the sort of the summation at the end of what we budgeted, what we spent, and here's where we're at and how it was all paid for? When are we going to see that report at council?
We requested early last week final numbers, what was left owing on that building. We didn't receive those until late Wednesday, so we were not able to get a report in. So myself and the treasurer will be able to sit down and go over those numbers and be able to provide a report on the next council meeting.
Great. Excellent. And then are we looking at some kind of open house or something to invite people in and show them the building and what they paid for and what they're going to get for it?
Yes, we were hoping to have these numbers so we could actually bring them to this council. Unfortunately, that didn't happen because it'd be nice to have a bit of a, financials out to the public before we actually have the open house. So there's some understanding there what the costs were. Unfortunately, so we were planning on November 4th as an open house, but we obviously were going to push that back and do the next available date after the next council meeting. So it would probably be the first Saturday after the next council meeting.
Excellent.
I believe it was the 16th or the 18th, sorry.
Block that right now. 16?
Might be
18.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. Good news.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the report? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2023-136 from the Director of Public Works be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thanks, Steve. And 8.5 Finance Department, report 2023-135 from the Director of Finance regarding the calculation of the annual tax rate. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Before I go into this report, I'd like to actually introduce our new staff in finance. Kim Brogan is our Deputy Treasurer Tax Collector. She comes to us with several years of municipal experience in finance including past responsibilities and experience with an accounting firm that specialized in municipal accounting. So we're very excited to have her, and I hope that everybody can join in and visit her and get to know her.
Welcome, Kim. Kim and I visited yesterday. I went down to her office. She's in the what was it referred to as the lower mezzanine for now. I promised her she had a better office coming down the road a little bit. But I would agree with Diane, like, make your trip in to visit with her. I think, based on the discussion that we had, I think she's going to be a very strong addition to our team here in terms of not just continuing, the way we've done business here, but maybe opportunities to give us some suggestions of how we can raise our game a little bit more in some places, which I strongly encouraged her that this council would be receptive to new ideas in different ways, and that there was, as far as the five of us were concerned, there's no sort of sacred cows, like, no, that's how we do it here. That absolutely, as bringing a new staff member in is an opportunity for them to bring in new ideas and suggestions for us, and that we would be open to that. So welcome, and thank you for coming today to watch our work here. Diane, back over to you.
So I have no further information. If council has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions from council on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-135 from the Director of Finance be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.5B, report 2023-137 from the Director of Finance regarding the 2024 draft capital budget. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight in this one before I ask council for questions?
Just a couple of points. As outlined in the report, the final capital budget comes in at a total of $3,397,695, and this includes any transfers from reserves to lessen the burden on the taxpayer. Keeping in mind this year's budget, 1% represents $103,516. As outlined in the report, the budget has been structured that all projects will be funded from reserves, and the transfer to reserves will be funded from taxation. So if there's any other questions in this report, I'd be glad to answer them, but we'll just go right into the presentation of the draft capital budget after. Any questions?
Is there any questions at this point before Diane goes into the presentation? And then you said, Diane, you want questions at the end, or do you want us to interrupt as you go?
I'm okay with interrupting as you
Okay,
go.
so I'm going to suggest then that, don't want to presuppose what you're going to want to do with this, but I think at this point, probably unlikely we're going to do anything, make substantial changes here. So I'm going to suggest that I'll treat this sort of fairly casually. So just like wave your hand, hit your button, and I'll leave it to Diane to manage your questions with this without me getting in the way of blah, 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 blah.
Okay. So slide one, as the township works to meet the regulations of the asset management plan, the township continues to work through closing the gap towards the annual requirement, and this budget is a start towards that. Okay, the following next couple of slides shows all the capital projects that we have been able to complete in 2023 through the various departments. And as you've read this presentation already, I'm not going to go through and read line by line, okay? So, staff have utilized a number of resources, tools towards building this budget. And they're outlined as on this slide. Okay, no questions? Okay, we'll go to the next one. So the following slide speaks to the 2024 budget. Okay, and so this particular slide lists the financial requirements over a 10-year span, both total funding and expenditures, and how much we are going to need over the 10 years in total. Okay. These next slides are a high level of the total expenditures needed by the various departments. This one in particular is the increase in the transfer to reserves that we're looking at for 24 and over the next 10 years. Okay. And this one is the actual departments and their needs to complete the projects over the next 10 years. Okay, and then this provides us the total capital expenses between both the transfer to reserves and the project schedule for each year. Our next slide is the funding that we'll be able, various funding sources that we're projecting. And then this also outlines the tax levy requirement and how it will hit our taxpayer and what the percentage of it will be based on. If 1% of our tax levy is the $103,516, and then each year above that. And as you can see, we have a couple of tough years ahead of us with the cost of inflation, and we're noticing a cost in a lot of our expenses have increased over the past year. And then after that, with this new structure, we see that it has stabilized and that the taxpayers should see a constant basic cost of living increase. Okay, we're hoping that the cost of living increase is going to kind of come down, right? But this, we're hoping it will help it out, okay? So this, again, is just a various of highlights throughout the 2024 capital budget and what various departments are doing. So this is these are just some of the projects that are highlighted within this budget. Okay, and again, these are additional projects outlined within the budget. And then we actually have a detail that I would like the department heads to speak to each department for council. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask those questions, and the department heads will be more than happy to help you out and answer them. Okay, so our first one is our general government. Here, all we're projecting right now is that we have a standard $10,000 that we will spend towards software or updates on computers, plus an additional software for asset management, which will help with our regulations deadline. So the one that's coming up, this one is decision support, will help with proposed service levels. So the idea is that staff will be able to take different scenarios and see how that's going to impact our assets and help us to make decisions as we work toward these projects. Okay, and this particular software is being utilized, is being a collaboration with the other area municipalities. So Oxford County is also involved, and the area municipalities. We all use the same platform for our asset management, which is citywide. This is an added module to it. So this is in collaboration with the other area municipalities. Okay. So the next one is our fire services. If the fire chief would like to speak to this.
In terms of capital planning, we are looking at a replacement cycle for all of our apparatus. They're currently running a 23-year replacement cycle with the fire chief pickup truck. Never had a replacement cycle scheduled, so it's been scheduled at 6 years for the past couple of years, so it will come due this year. An increase in reserves in terms of our communication system. Rather than funding a large one-time replacement, we're looking at doing upgrades year to year. So as those quotes come in, we have been allocating those funds year to year. SCBA has a life cycle of 15 years for our cylinders, so those funds are starting to be allocated. The actual frame and pack they're used have a different life cycle, so we are monitoring that, and then we will start building reserves for those as well, and look at breaking those purchases out when the time comes. And then the other piece there is for larger batch items, so ongoing bunker gear replacement, radios, pagers, big pieces of equipment that go into the station on a year-to-year piece. In terms of our facilities, those are being bundled in with a facilities capital reserve. Yeah, I think the biggest shock here is the increase in apparatus pricing. We purchased an apparatus this year, purchased last year, delivered this year, and the pricing on it is shocking at what they are marketing that same truck for in 2024. So we've adjusted for that, hoping that there's a correction, but we're planning for the worst.
Any questions? Okay, building department, there's nothing that's scheduled for this year. They purchased their truck in 2023. So parks and recreation. Michelle?
Thanks, Diane. The first item there is an allocation of $30,000. That's just an earmark to be able to perform a fees and charges review. I think I've talked to some of you about that kind of review. It involves bringing in an outside consultant that takes a look at the costs that we spend each year for the different facilities, an engagement piece with the different organizations and associations to get some feedback from them. Also doing a bit of a study in terms of what adjoining municipalities are charging as well. So it's a comprehensive review. And again, that's been earmarked for the budget. In terms of equipment, I was hoping that Jason was here, because those are pieces that have been brought forward, I think. Oh, it's okay. I'll try to do my best to answer some of those questions there. In terms of, there's a recycling of equipment that happens, so we're anticipating getting a truck from fire services for 2024. We need to do some condenser work at the arena in Embro. We're looking at updating some tables and chairs at the Embro facility as well. And also the dishwasher needs to be replaced. In addition, we're looking at some additions to the ice making equipment, some updates to that. At the Thamesford Arena, we're looking at a consolidation of the sound system there. My understanding is there's two different sound systems that work off of different kind of components and doesn't always work at the best of times. So we're looking at consolidating that to have one that can be shared by all facility users. And again, we're looking at purchasing new tables and chairs, and we've got a computer replacement for the pool. In terms of the trail work, the banner trail, the Wildcat Trail, you'll recall that was supposed to have been done in 2023, so that's going to be done in 2024. And then it's been identified that the playground and the Embro Memorial Park is to be replaced, so we've identified some monies for that. In terms of the parks, council did pass a resolution to include disc golf as part of the 2024 budget deliberations, so we have done that, and there was a report that went to council on that item. And then also we have the new pavilion at the Embro Park. We were successful in getting Trillium funding for that project. So happy to answer any questions that anyone might have about those items.
Councillor Finch?
Can you just explain to me the side-by-side? What is that, what do you need that machine for exactly?
Yeah, and Jason's probably better to articulate what we needed that for. My understanding is it's to help with garbage removal and doing some turf maintenance. It's just an extra piece of equipment that our facility staff could use so that we could get some of the repair and the turf work done. In my understanding of talking to Jason, it's not vital that we get that equipment for 2024, so if we do have to take a look at making some changes or deletions, then that's something that certainly could be considered.
Okay.
If I can ask a follow-up, and then, so I know in the past, some of the conversations around getting in for when garbage cans can be in certain locations in different seasons and such, that the trucks getting into certain spaces becomes a challenge, depending on the conditions of the grounds. So would this, I know it's difficult for you to answer when it's sort of, Jason is the boots on the ground to know how this works. Is there potential that this could increase the service level of what we're able to provide to residents because it doesn't have the same restrictions that a full-size truck would have?
Absolutely could, yeah.
Councillor Stewart?
No, I was later, but I wanted to ask that right after.
That's okay. I'm wondering if you could maybe expand on the 30,000 for the fees and charges review. And I'm probably oversimplifying the process in my mind, but we have a list of fees and rates that we would charge, not unlike other municipalities. And I'm not saying any of those are accurate, and if we're just comparing to inaccurate data, that's not going to yield much. But what do we expect to get different from that? Do they dive deeper on cost analysis of operating the buildings to see if this is the right fees, or what exactly are we getting? It seems like a big price tag, so I just want to understand it better.
Yep, and I want council to know that I put the upper limit on that. Obviously, it would be RFP to see what more competitive figures could come in for that. But yes, it's a very comprehensive process. They'll take a look at all of the fees that we take a look at in terms of running our facilities. Because I think sometimes when you take a look at what we charge today and then adding on like the cost of living adjustment, where I'm just not so sure that the cost that we charge today is recouping what it should be recouping in terms of some of our costs. So I know that in some of the municipalities, they've gone through the process. It's a process that takes a look at best practices within the sector, but also takes a look at your costs, takes a look at the neighbors' costs, but it's the engagement piece too. So the consultant's able to talk to the different community groups and organizations, to let them know that we're doing the review, to get their their input in terms of what's working, maybe not what's not working, and maybe what some of the concerns are, but then also provide a plan going forward. So this isn't something that would happen just in 1 year. It might be a plan for the next 5 or 10 years. We know that in recreation, we're not going to fully recover our costs. Probably don't even do that at 50%, maybe 40 or 30, but I have nothing in front of us now to know what it is that we are recouping, whether it's 10 or 20 or 30%.
Thank you, Michelle. Anyone else? Councillor Mitchell?
Not a question, but a follow-up comment to that, and I'm always leery about going outside the extra cost, but I kind of compare this to what we did in our salary structure review, where 2-3 years ago we hired outside consultant to review our entire salary structure, and the information we got from that I thought was very valuable in reassessing how we paid our entire staff. So I anticipate, though 30,000 is a significant dollar amount, that the return on this information as far as restructuring our scheduling and other information as to how possibly can increase revenue and or reduce cost is probably warranted by that.
As a follow-up on the same topic, because I know some of these pieces we've done in the past internally as staff in terms of the consultation with the user groups and a review of the area municipalities for their rates, but as you've outlined, there's other pieces of information that we're going to get from this. Do you anticipate, so we, historic practice has intended for us to do that internally on an annual basis. This is obviously potentially up to $30,000 investment. Is this the type of process that you think, like, how far out does this hold before you would be recommending to go to an outside consultant again for this type of in-depth information?
That's a good question. I would think that you can, once the plan is in place, it can be in place for many years, right? Because so you're starting at the base amount and then applying the CPI on top of that. When you're doing that today without knowing if that's the right price to be charging, there's just some uncertainty in terms of, is that the right cost that we should be charging? Are we recouping some of our revenue? So I don't see it as you do it every year, every 5 years. I think it could be done every 8 to 10 or maybe more years. And again, you're taking a look at the comparisons with other municipalities too, right? So when you're seeing that they're kind of creeping up as well, then that or inflation goes up, or your costs go up and, you're not getting the revenue, then maybe that would be another, cause to take another look at it. But this is more of a long-term view of sustainability for those fees.
Just a quick follow-up. I know, we all know that we operate recreation. We subsidize, like recreation is subsidized by taxpayers, and I know that's always been part of the conversation when we're exploring fee and charges with our user groups. But in the past, have we had anything that shows, just quite to what rate? Like, will this provide more detailed information that, I will continue being committed to subsidizing recreation for residents, but does this provide details about to what extent we're doing that will help facilitate those conversations with user groups?
Yeah, I believe that it will. I've had discussions with Diane, and it's difficult for us to determine based on the way that the budget's set up in costing centers. I'm not sure that we're actually allocating the costs specifically to the right cost center, or we're amalgamating different cost centers. So we don't have clarity in terms of what those costs are.
Michelle, I have a question about the Embro Pavilion. In your discussions with our community partners, is there fundraising at a point where we're confident that this project will happen next year?
We haven't had a meeting yet. I know that we're scheduling a meeting, but the parameters of the Trillium funding is that it needs to be spent within the year. So we need to have a conversation about either ramping up that or taking a look at the scale of the project so that we can include it within the available funding envelope.
And what is the amount of the Trillium funding grant? Is it
95?
pretty significant?
90,000.
90,000,
Yep.
yes.
Oh, so it's very significant that we can't. Okay, because the condition of our contribution is that the fundraising has to be completed before we contribute. So there is certainly a timeline
Yeah, and we'll
to
address that
get
with
this
the group.
done.
Absolutely, yeah.
One last one. So we have the Embro Memorial Park Playground replacement slated for 2024. In the past, we've had some playground equipment removed because it no longer met the requirements of safety inspections. And I know the Recreation Arts and Culture Master Plan has asked for an enhancement of our playground services, and I know that staff have identified, based on industry standard, that we're entering end of lifespan for a lot of our facilities. In terms of the specific scheduling of not just this one, but the ones moving forward, are these scheduled because they are anticipating no longer meeting safety standards, or because they are fitting within that window of replacement of end of life cycle, as well as being supported by what the community and council has asked for?
And that's a good question. I know that we spoke a little bit about that. I don't have the background information to know if it's the end of life for that equipment. I can certainly go back to the department and talk to Jason and have some more accurate information for council before we come back to this capital item.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, we'll go on to the next category, which is facilities. This is a new category that we've established. And the idea was that instead of every department having a reserve for facilities, we looked at the township as a whole with the facilities and just putting money into one reserve to fund the capital projects within the various facilities of the township. Included in this one is also the new building, a MIN building in Thamesford, along with any furnishings that are needed and appliances, and a potential, if possible, an EV charging system that we're looking at possible grant applications for 2024 to be able to help fund that. Included, we're looking at bay doors for Uniondale Fire Hall. The library that's percentage that we would be paying towards Oxford County. They would oversee those three projects, and then we pay our share. It's 40% of those costs. There is a number of projects for the new ZMF building that is in need of. So we've added it to this particular area of facilities because it's a new facility, and we looked at it as a new asset toward that facility. And then we just have some standard, also additional upgrades and replacements at the various recreation facilities. Including right now is the potential for renovation at the Scout Hall. And this is just for discussion purposes also, and staff will be continuing to bring reports to council based on this project. But we wanted to put it in the budget. If there's any questions or that council have, we'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, I have lots of questions for this page. And the first one is, and you already answered one of the questions, was what's the rationale for creating the facilities category? And I agree with, it makes a whole lot of sense to section that out and do it in a different way than we have in the past. What's the criteria of what goes into facilities and what was left in the some of the individual departments? And something that jumped out at me was that the tables and chairs for the community centers was left under Parks and Recreation, but workbenches for the ZMF were considered facilities. So what's the rationale behind that?
So what I looked at is that the tables and chairs are a replacement. And so I looked at it that it's already an asset sitting there, and this is a wish from that department to upgrade that, whereas the benches are a brand new asset that the current facility does not house at this time, and that's how so it would be a brand new asset. So that's how I just had set it up at this time. And in the future, if they have to replace that bench, well, then that's going to be their responsibility under the equipment.
The ZMC, the $5.9 million under other for funding of that, what went into that? That was property sales, et cetera.
That's correct. We had various sales of property. We also, under one portion of it, we're taking some funds for the building department, which is under reserves, that we'll be utilizing that. We're looking at, what else is there? Don will be able to explain a little bit more.
Sure. So there are some property sales under that included in the 5.9. We will look at potentially using some other sales that happened last year. Once we know the final cost of the building, we will be able to give council a better picture of what we will need to finance. There's still some options out there for other funds, so that would also include the $750 from FedDev for the grant.
So my notes from back when we had months and months of discussions how we were going to do this was the profit of the Maple Leaf food sales, various sales that we made, the big sale, the smaller sales to primarily Kingwood, but also the Hog. A portion of the profit from the sale of the old Thamesford Fire Hall. Some of that has been siphoned off for the recreation equipment storage, whatever we do with that. The $750,000 grant that you just mentioned, and the future sale, and was the sign out front that we're actually going to do this, aren't we? Yeah. So that's basically the package that goes to that $5.9 million.
Correct.
Didn't miss anything there.
That's correct.
Okay. When we awarded the contract for the ZMC, we budgeted $200,000 for solar panels. Is that included in the $6.3 million cost of construction?
So as it stands now, we haven't included. Work is going on right now with the consultant to let us know what we should be putting on the roof. It's going to be built so that it could go on the roof, but we may want to just take a pause, look at what our building requirements are to see if we really need that much. So depending on how the overall budget comes in for that project, there could be savings of $200,000 that we did have budgeted for the solar panels. I think we should take a wait-and-see approach with that to see what our energy needs are for that building.
is it's a real unknown right now because we haven't been in there. We don't have any comparable buildings. We have estimates from the electrical mechanical engineer, but we don't have actuals yet. So if there is some savings to be had, that may be something that council would want to consider.
And I think that approach is similar. When we made that decision, we put in 200,000 because we needed to put in a number to cover that part of the project. But I think we've taken a similar approach to what we did with the solar panels with the ZMF, where we didn't spend all the money to project what was 100% needs. I think it was 85%, and we're going to run it for a year and see where we're at. So I think from what I hear, Don, is that's kind of the same approach we're taking on this, because there's so much unknown in the solar panel technology.
And also our energy requirements at this building are not going to be as substantial as it is at ZMF. We also have offsetting revenue from the childcare, so it's not like we're going to be in a deficit position, operating this building. So we just need to really assess what the benefits would be for installing the panels and how much of a savings there would be for us.
So I guess to Paul's first question, in that 6.3 million, is there money to put solar panels on the roof?
No.
So if we budget like this, then there is no savings to not putting them on in this budget because we're not budgeting to put them on. It would be an increased expense later, whether it was 100,000 or 200,000 would be an increased expense to do it later on.
Correct.
So we also have a commitment as a municipality to use 100% renewable energy by 2040. This building is going to be operational in 2024, which means there's then 16 years to then get it to using renewable energy. I guess what I'm wondering is, how are we going to assess, what's the plan to assess whether those solar panels are going to in fact save us money or not, and how they're going to affect our commitment to reach 100% renewable energy by 2040?
Crescent Ridge Solar Services are reviewing our needs now, so they'll be able to give us an estimate of what we would be able to save if we installed the panels. So that report will go to council probably sometime in February. So we would know then what the cost would be for the panels if we did proceed next year, or if we held off for a year. They've said, we should have a good look at our energy bills first before we decide on what to go. They will be able to provide their best estimates, but until that time is known, we really won't know. As far as the renewables go, from that we would have to look at what Ontario Earth Power is charging us to know what percentage of that is coming from renewables, and that's easily something we can find out.
So a follow-up then, when council made the final decision to proceed with this building, and I can't remember, and I apologize for not looking it up before because I frankly didn't think of it until Paul asked the question, but in the report that council adopted to decide to build the ZMC, did that recommendation include the solar panels on the roof and a renewable energy component or not?
It did, yes.
So now this budget though is not delivering on that?
No, because of the additional expenses that we've incurred to this point, we've delayed that, or potentially delaying it pending council's decision.
All right, I'll leave it.
So what am I hearing is that we potentially could build this, tie into the grid for a short period of time till we establish what our energy needs are, and then decide how much solar panels.
So that's one of the options, is that we would operate it without solar panels to see what our energy requirements are for the building, and that would help us assess the level of solar that we would need to put on the roof to make us at net zero. Or net metering, sorry.
Okay. Now the ZMF, we would get a credit, but we're not going to get paid if we produce extra. Would that be the same arrangement here? If we were to go ahead and put up solar panels and found out that we were producing way more than we needed, could we have a contract to get paid for it?
No.
Okay, so that's why we have to be conscious that we don't overbuild the solar panels, because if we spend extra money on solar panels and produce energy, we're limited to how much we can use over the course of a year. We can't make money off this.
That's correct.
Okay. I think that's important to consider before we invest in solar panels. That we need what we need. We don't want to build more than we need because the capital cost would never be recouped. Go ahead, Ken.
Is I agree with the idea of let's assess. That's great. Let's assess and put up what we actually need. What I'm concerned about is not budgeting for it. Because in other cases, for instance, I can't remember what it was called, but the fees and schedules, we're proposing to budget $30,000 for it and hoping that the RFP comes in at less than that. To me, the responsible thing to do here would be to say, first of all, council already said to build it with the solar panels. So to me, this is a decision point for council now to not do what we previously decided to do. But also, I think we should be budgeting for it, and then if we decide after a year it's only 150,000, then we've done that. But otherwise, we've actually decided to build a building with solar panels, then we don't budget to build it with solar panels, and then a year later we're like, now we have to spend an extra $200,000 to put solar panels on it, when we actually already decided to build a building with solar panels on it and never actually decided to not do it, we just decided to not budget for it.
And that's what I was going to ask is, like, we're looking at 2024 here. We know we want a period of time to wait until we see what the energy usage is. In the 10-year capital, 2025, do we have an earmark 200,000 for solar panels on ZMC?
So in this budget, under the EV charging, you have $150,000 there. That's premised on not getting grants because it looks like the cost for that would be about $75,000 per level 3 charger, and that's what we're going to submit for. And there's funding of up to 75% of that. So there is some redundancy built in this budget that would allow us to flow that money through to solar panels based on what the costs come in at for the EV charging stations.
But we don't know that funding is for sure.
Correct. Grant submission is due in January. So the building is all set for the EV chargers. It will be all set for the solar panels. Both would just need to be add-ons to the building.
Yeah, but council decided to build it with solar panels, not with the potential to add on. And now we're not budgeting to do it. That's to me the problem, because I think this is a decision point now for council, right?
It is.
This is essentially, like, realistically, procedurally, this is reconsideration. Right? Council decided I've made a note here to get it, but there was a resolution that says build that building with solar panels on it. But now we're not budgeting to deliver on this.
Correct.
But there also seemed to be some support that it makes sense to wait a year for all the right reasons. So I wouldn't expect to see this in the 2024 capital budget. I'd expect to see it in 2025.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the responsible way to go about it. I get your concerns, Marcus. But to go ahead and spend money in 2024, because of, without knowing and having nowhere close to knowing what we need or what our needs are and what we need to spend to cover those needs, I think is irresponsible. And if we do have that 150,000 in there for charging stations, and the decision is to delay the charging stations by a year so that we go ahead and spend that money on solar panels, I think that's responsible as well.
So if I could bring back a subsequent report just outlining what we are doing with EV charging, the options for council, and how we could scale that back slightly. Rather than applying for the level 3s, we could apply for the level 2s. And within that 150, there would likely be 100,000 that could be earmarked for solar. as a start. You know, I think that would hopefully give council some satisfaction that there is money being set aside for the solar part of it. It's all fairly new, like, you know, based on what's happening with this office, we did anticipate bringing our EV chargers with them. Something's happened that may not be possible. We did put 150 in to look at level 3 chargers, as we felt that would be a good route to go. But in order to get the solar panels in, or at least put probably 50% funding towards it, we could adjust that. So I think we can accomplish what council wants just by making that simple change.
Deputy Mayor Gregg.
I mean, we have a budget full of things that we're planning on doing, and anything that's outside of the year we're passing is just an endorsement. So to have had, and I don't have the resolution in front of me, but to have made a decision about including solar as part of this build, it should be in this budget. We also have examples of projects like, we're not there yet, but the extension of the Middleton Street sidewalk, which could be eligible for development charges as a funding source for that project after we undergo our next development study charge. But that price point and that project are still captured in our capital plan that we may not be funding through our tax levy reserve contributions to pay for those capital expenditures. So regardless of the funding source or the availability of grant, I would still like to see the solar project put in here as a number in a year. And I know there's some things happening on the side here, so maybe I'll just leave it at that because there may be further discussion once we...
I would ask you to take the chair.
Is he still Mayor Ryan when he's out of the chair? Yeah, Mayor Ryan?
Thank you. Not surprising to any of you probably, I'm quite passionate about this. But actually maybe not for, I mean, first of all, because of the 100% renewable component, and I think it's the right thing to do, and I think in the long run, my expectation is that we'll absolutely save Zorra residents money. But also because we did give direction to build a building that had solar panels on the roof. And so we should be budgeting to deliver on the decision that we made. So I don't know whether, you know, how council wants to deal with this in terms of, you know, do we adopt the report and what we want to do, but I am prepared to put a motion on the floor, and I do have a seconder, that staff be directed to return a report on revised proposed 2024 capital budget that includes the previously directed solar panels to the roof of the ZMC. You know, as Councillor Stewart said, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, let's build the building, see what the energy needs are, and put in appropriately sized solar panels on the roof. That seems totally reasonable to me. What I am concerned about is not allocating those funds, because then what that means is that we have not delivered on the decision that we previously made, and it means that it would put a decision point in front of a future council, maybe this one, maybe a future one, of do we add in money to do a thing that a previous council actually decided to do. So that's the reason to me. However council wants to decide to do this, I am prepared to, and that's why I mean, I could have said this from the chair without giving up the chair, but because I am prepared to make the motion, I thought it would be best for all of you if I gave up the chair and then somebody else can govern me accordingly.
Is there any, I mean, we're still in budget kind of discussion, so, yep, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, I just finished saying I would put this in the 2025 budget, and then I second putting it in the 2024, but I think the reality is we're committing to it now like we committed to it previously. And the reality is whether it's in this budget and it happens in 2025, that funding gets deferred to 2025 spending, at least we're still committing to it. And likely it will get pushed if we need that amount of time to, I would think, a full cycle of heating and cooling seasons to be able to determine the actual usage and the needs that we're going to have there. So that's why it's still fine with me, even though it is 2024 instead of 2025.
Yeah, I'm much less passionate than Marcus is about solar panels and our commitment to net zero, but I won't sidetrack the whole debate by going into that. But I'm actually going to support your motion because we did say that we're going to build this with a solar panel component. You've agreed that the responsible way to do it is to assess what this building needs and how much money we need to spend to provide those needs. And I think that $200,000 that we talked about when we awarded this project should be included in the budget. And when we get further down in the discussion of budget, and we get to the point where we have a full understanding of what the increase to the tax levy and the impact on our residents is going to be, perhaps we take out EV chargers, or we take out, or we delay some type of a structure for the recreation department to balance this out. But I think at this point, we made the commitment, much as you and I are on the opposite ends of the scale. Not totally on the I'm on the scale, I'm just not where you are. On the commitment to it, and I think because we did that commitment, it should be in the 2024 budget, and if it doesn't work, we can talk about it later on in the next 4 meetings that we're going to talk about budget.
Thank you. So in terms of debate, I now do have a motion in front of me, so I'm going to read this motion and then we can continue discussing positions on it afterwards. So I have moved by Ryan, seconded by Stewart. And my apologies, I called you Kevin. I should have called you Councillor Stewart previously. My apologies. Moved by Ryan, seconded by Stewart, that staff be directed to return a report or revised proposed 2024 capital budget that includes the previously directed solar panels to the roof of the ZMC. As the mover of the motion, would you like to speak to this, Mayor Ryan?
Yeah, I think I've mostly spoken to it already, but to be clear, I left it, I don't really mind whether it's a whole subsequent report or just a revised 2024 capital budget, and I intentionally didn't say what year it would be in the capital budget. I'm perfectly comfortable with that level of detail being left to staff to say what's the appropriate fiscal year to put it in. I don't mind, but what I do want to see is, as Councillor Stewart said earlier on in the discussion around this, that I want to see that an appropriate number in the budget so that we have the ability to do that, or for a future council to decide not to do it. But I don't think the main thing to me is I don't think it would be responsible to decide to build the building that way and then not budget accordingly. So however it's budgeted accordingly, I'm comfortable with, as long as it is in that budget.
All again? Oh, sorry. Moved by Ryan, seconded by Stewart, that staff be directed to return a report or revised proposed 2024 capital budget that includes the previously directed solar panels to the roof of the ZMC. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
Councillor Mitchell.
Okay, I have a question about the ZMC that has nothing to do with solar panels. And when we awarded the contract, according to my notes, there was a estimated cost of $468,000 to demolish the old Maple Leaf Technical Services building. Did we pay for that last year, or did that kind of disappear through our ongoing? That was part of the land swap with Kingwood to get the lot where we're now building the new ZMC. did we pay that last year, or did that somehow disappear or get reduced through further negotiations with Kingwood? Because I don't see almost $500,000 in this budget to cover that.
Excuse me, it was paid in 2023.
Okay.
So we can do it we can look at it as either way. We can either put it as the Maple Leaf, an additional cost there, or if we want to see how much this actual project is going to cost us, we can add it as a side note to that project, so we can get the overall cost, because we couldn't do this building without that demolition too.
Exactly, that was part of the deal. So when we get the end of year for this year, that information will be in there. We don't have to worry about spending it, we've already spent it.
Correct.
That's good. If I can continue. The depth, there's 200,000 in there for furnishings and appliances. Now, my assumption is that most of the desks and chairs and computers and whatnot would be transferred. So is that 200,000 primarily for furnishings for the daycare part of the project?
No, that's for all new furnishings for the office, so we've included these as part of the sale. Not the council furniture, but the office desks. Just because the layout and size of the new offices are substantially smaller than what we have now, the equipment wouldn't fit.
Okay. And I was going to question the financial, why we're doing that, but if the equipment doesn't fit, then it makes sense to, so the terms of sale for this building will be basically as is with some exceptions, such as.
Correct.
Is our, okay, that explains that. And down at the bottom, we mentioned, do we have any more information about that's 120,000 in there for the Scout Hall renovations? Two-part question, do we have any estimate of what that works out to on a per square foot basis to do that? And has staff looked at the alternative, and here we're kind of coming back to the long discussions about what we had on the ZMC, instead of renovating the Scout Hall, demolishing it and building a very basic storage shed. Are those still on the table? Because to me, 120,000, I've never been in the Scout Hall, but I've driven by, it doesn't look like much of a building. To sink 120,000 into that for just storing a lawnmower and some other stuff seems like a lot of money.
So we put this in to start discussions. We know that the equipment the equipment needs to be stored somewhere. This is a start. This is one of the ideas brought forward, and staff are looking at providing more report to council with that. Michelle, I don't know if you have anything else to offer.
No, not at this time. Again, we're in the preliminary stages of looking at this. We wanted to put a number in the budget. We can define that number, obviously. I think what the main cost was to put the overhead door in, because the way that the doors are right now, it wouldn't facilitate us moving in and out of the equipment in the Scout Hall. So that was the big one. I think we'd rather be on the safe side in terms of budgeting, but we can absolutely look at some costs to kind of get a more exact figure.
Okay, there again, we're looking for more reports on details on that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
In terms of the $120,000 that's being budgeted, so you've been very clear, there hasn't been a decision made by council. Like, there will be a council decision. There's obviously a lot of moving pieces and some history with this, so especially for anyone who's watching at home, this is being put in so that if and when those decisions are made, we're not held up in when we can start this work, because we're not including it in this year's budget. If we hold it off until we've made the decision, we're also postponing that work if and when it's time for it to happen. So when we had discussions around the sale of the old fire hall, part of what we were losing from a service level delivery was that storage for some of that equipment. I know, we've had lots of discussions about how we're managing that in the interim, but ultimately it wasn't a sustainable long-term solution. We still may have opportunities in eventual redevelopment of our arena facility to house some of our storage there, and that can be built into the design. For the $120,000, is that funding to be coming from our new structure of tax levy to capital, or to reserves to fund the capital project? Or are those funds earmarked in a separate reserve from when we made the sale of the fire hall and allocated funds to be redirected to the purpose of recreation storage, whatever shape or form that would eventually take?
That's correct. This is your second point that you made, that it's already been earmarked through a previous resolution from council, and it's been set aside in a reserve for future development of that facility.
So as a follow-up, well, of course, doing this as cost-effective as possible, I'm sure staff will also be able to look at, it might not just be demolish and build new or renovate what we have. There could be an addition to the existing and have it house certain in-house things, and then maybe there's garage structure add-on. Whatever, at the end of the process, if whatever funds are set aside for this that are not utilized, what would happen with those funds? Where would those go?
They would just remain in the reserve that it's currently in, and I believe it's right now in land development. So any projects, any land that is sold, we're putting into that reserve land development. And so it would just stay there for future development of any other facilities that are needed or projects that we're looking at.
Great, thank you.
I have a question on the Scout Hall renovation. So we currently have, user groups and individuals that use that facility for various things. There's some question about, exactly what the agreement is and how definitive it is. If we're going to renovate it to use it, if the proposal is that we renovate it to use it for storage, that means those user groups, at the very least, wouldn't be able to use it in the way that they did before, if they would be able to use it at all. Are we going to have some kind of report coming in the future for a decision point for council on that?
Yes, we will, because it's only incumbent on ourselves if we're to take over that facility. If that does happen, we need to find solutions as to where those groups can still have their meetings and participate and store their equipment. So that would be detailed as part of that staff report.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, I know maybe more information to follow, but as a preliminary scoping for that project, you mentioned the overhead doors for equipment access. Is there, I think someone might have mentioned an addition or something, but looking at the rough size and scale of that building, is there needs to increase the size of it, or what are like the very, very high level scope that you're basing 120 on, just so that we kind of have a feel for what is being intended here?
Again, I think we're basing the 120 based on the previous council decision, right, in terms of the previous building that was earmarked, I think, in the 2023 budget. But no, we think on a preliminary review of it that would be large enough to house the equipment. We don't have a building currently, right? So anything that we can get would really be appreciated, and we think it would suffice to store all of our equipment.
Just as a quick information item to the new councilors, in the previous term, we did ask staff to include a new build, and there was discussions of building a new structure on site at the TDRC, and the price tag for that was significantly higher than what we're looking at here. So this is sort of step 10 in a sort of lengthy process of trying to when we decided to sell the fire hall. So there is additional information out there that is becoming a little bit outdated, but may be of interest as we continue thinking about the Scout Hall and the storage question.
Okay, we will continue on. We're under transportation services. Steve, would you like to speak to the categories within your department?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to speak to here. The equipment replacement that you see here budgeted for 2024 is just by sticking by the equipment replacement schedule. Pieces of equipment such as the mowers and the sweeper are attachment equipment we kind of deem as attachment equipment. We assess those the year of replacement. The mowers, for example, were a more expensive mower when we bought them. The replacement schedule had not been changed, so we saw how they performed. To date, they're performing very well. They're held up very well. So I can foresee possibly that we won't have to replace those. We can look at those maybe in the 25 or 26 budget, but until we get a full assessment on them before next year's use. But just so council knows, we do assess these types of equipment before we're just replacing them. And then the bridges, pretty much as council already knows, there will be no funding on bridges going towards new projects, bridge projects next year due to the switch from the rehabilitation of Bridge 26 to a full replacement this year. So any questions?
We don't have any questions. We'll continue on. Oh, yes, Councilor.
Don't have a question, but I do have a comment, and then I won't talk about this anymore. I am disappointed that line 29 is not on here to be paved, but I did bring this up twice, or I brought it up once back in April, and count that it be included in this budget. I could tell from the tone of discussion that wasn't going to pass, so I amended my motion that it be considered. Steve and Diane came back in September with a proposal that included line 29 being paid in 2024. Council voted not to accept that proposal. I talked to Steve privately about potentially paving only part of it, and I understand his position why it's not included in here. So I've lost that fight twice. I'm not going to keep hammering on it this year. But I just wanted to make that comment at this point, and as I said, that's it for a few months anyway on that issue.
So I was going to bring this up when we talk about future years' capital budgets and sort of how you're allocating funds, but obviously we talked a lot about line 29, and we talked a lot about roads in general, and the resolution back in September was really to say that, you know, don't sacrifice roads when it comes to budget time, so that we maintain our current roads or continue to improve our current roads as needed. So whether that really truly applies to 2024 or maybe it's more 2025 and on, could you maybe speak to just sort of your mindset as you prepare the budget for this next 10 years and just really planning out those projects in that same way?
Yeah, so I don't foresee any conversion of gravel to paved roads till 2031. That's where we're at, sticking with the needs of the roads that we have in place now, especially our asphalt assets and the condition they're in. We are going to be till 2031 before we can start looking at paving new roads, or conversion, for a better term. I'd love to do some sooner, believe me, and we've got roads in need now, not just the 29th line, but we've got some side roads are seeing extremely high traffic volumes and high maintenance expenses due to it. And we'd like to see those get paved sooner than later, but as to stick to the plan and to get our existing asphalt assets in good condition again so we can move forward on these new assets, it's just not doable until we can actually.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that the measure of success is when we finally reach that point where we're paving a gravel road. I think it's just sticking with the roads need study, as well as making sure that all of our assets are being maintained as they should be. So.
And that's correct. And there's more money going towards roads in the reserve. So, we're going to be looking at this as a living document. So, as the reserve kicks in, maybe we'll be able to move some of these conversion projects up, and which means, we'll be able to tackle more of our reconstruction and rehabilitation of existing roads sooner, so we can get to that point sooner.
Question for me, with the intention of hopefully like informing council sort of where their options are to go ahead with following up on these questions around roads. Like organizationally, do we have capacity, that if council decided they wanted to accelerate, looking after our existing paved roads and accelerate conversion of roads, do we have capacity to do that if council was to say, we will allocate more funds towards improving those roads? Or is it more complex than saying, here's money, convert a road?
No, I think it has to be a direction from council actually to move forward. If we want more funding to move this process faster, then it has to be a council decision to actually do this. It's no problem putting, once we have a number, putting a plan in place for council's review and to move forward on it.
So the reason I asked the question is I want to point out to council that it really is up to the five of us at this point to say, if we want to accelerate this, we can accelerate this, right? Our staff know how to repave a road, they know how to maintain a gravel road, they know how to convert a gravel road to a paved road. So it really is up to this council to say, are we comfortable with the plan that's in front of us right now at the rate that would happen? Or do we want to allocate more funds, and in which years that would accelerate that happening? But it's up to the five of us how we want to navigate that. But I think the answer from our staff is they're able to do that if we decide that that's a priority and we want to fund it. Because the reality is it's not that we don't know how to convert that road from gravel to paved. It's that with the tax rate that we have and the priorities that we've given them, that's not a priority that we're going to see until 2031. So I'm not advocating either way. I'm just making it clear to council that if there's an appetite to accelerate that, that's how we accelerate that, is to direct changes to this budget to make that happen. So I'll leave that with Deputy Mayor Gregg.
So we can allocate more funds to expedite a process specific within roads network improvement of conversions. But we also have referenced extensively in our previous discussions the roads needs study, the ongoing analysis of our staff, and the measurements, and then also, the budget that we're working with. Is it also, just to be clear, is it also possible for this council to, in alignment with the resolution we passed last month, to continue using the roads needs study and staff expertise to maintain and opportunities to enhance our roads network? I think that was the general nature of the resolution, to allocate additional funds through an increased reserve contribution that does not specify the specific area of road improvement that council would like to see, for example, conversions, but additional funds that leverages staff to, through their tools and expertise, continue to make additional investment into the road network that would see us seeing improvements at an expedited rate, but still not specifying which projects, which years we're looking to pull ahead or pull back, or getting in discussions where, these residents or this road or that road. Because we are now utilizing a reserve contribution as the method of funding our capital projects, that reserve contribution is calculated based on what the capital plans are. But if we want to see those capital plans move forward, any increase, including, a $10,000 annual increase, we're not going to see more projects coming forward immediately. But over time, there should be the ability for staff to be able to do a little bit more with them. So I realize I just said a lot of things in a long, rambling piece, but what I want to make sure is it possible for council to also not get specific in how they want to enhance and expedite the improvements of our roads network, but to create an increased allocation to the roads construction project through the reserve contribution that would just leverage staff to continue bringing forward capital projects at their discretion?
Is that a question? So, yes. Okay, so if you're asking, is that a possibility to do that, then yes, that would be my recommendation, would be to, if there was an appetite to increase the amount of funding towards road conversion, that that increase, that number is given to staff, and then a 10-year projected plan would be presented to council with that change. As per the roads deed study and as per the condition, current condition and foregoing condition of the roads and the deterioration rate of the road network now. And yes, what that would do would accelerate our conversion plan. So which would mean we'd get through those roads quicker, we'd get the repaving done faster, and the reconditioning done faster, and which will allow us to start converting more roads sooner.
So along the same lines, like, I think what I understood, and I had one budget round last year, but obviously some here were here a lot longer and have seen maybe the impacts of cuts to keep, tax increases at a minimum. And I think from what I understood through discussions in September, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is that in the past, too often we've found roads, maybe bridges, I'm not sure, as a means to sort of cut back on tax increases. So that's been one sacrifice. So without an increased level of spending, what I took from our September discussions is that we're not willing to do that anymore, and that's at least a step further than we were in previous years without actually specifically saying any increased funding. Is that true?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So then looking at what we have in front of us in terms of a 10-year, even right now as we sit here, it does look like 2024 represents a very significant increase, as well as 2025. Overall, I would think that, we've already made some improvement by committing to not cut out of this budget every year. If I was expecting to see how we would implement this increased, maybe accelerated roads improvement with more funding, for me, that would be appropriate to come in 2026 and beyond. After we've sort of seen some other things that have, with transfers to reserves that have really changed the budgets for the next 2 years in this capital plan.
That's correct. It's going to take a couple years to build up a reserve to make some real impact to this 10-year plan, right? Projects are large. When you look at road projects especially, and bridge projects as well, you don't see much under, $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000. So it takes a couple years of reserve fund build up to be able to make an impact on these projects.
Yeah, Kevin, you just stole my thunder a little bit, what I was sitting here, what I was gonna say, but I agree with you. Like, to me, roads are my number one priority because the people I represent, roads are their number one, our priority in my ward. Like, I realize I represent everybody in the bigger context, but the people that elected me originally, that's their big priority. So I would love to see us put another $1 million a year towards roads, but I go back to page 14 of this report, which shows the 10 years capital tax levy, and this year we're looking at a 13% increase. Next year we're looking at a 17% increase. So I agree with you. This, if we're going to do it, it's as much as we'd like to do it today. Realistically, 2026 is really the first time that we can, and that's an election year, so we'll see what happens then.
For me, like you said, Paul, roads and bridges are very important. That's what we get most of our phone calls about. For me, Marcus, Paul, I would totally support bumping this up, and I think that we have to do it now. I know 2026 is more important, and I know these numbers are high, but we're sitting in these seats to take care of the future. And I think that it's important that we act now versus 2026. So I don't know how I go about doing that, but, or if.
Well, I mean,
appetite?
how we go about doing that procedurally, right, is I think at some point in the budget process, a councillor puts forward a motion to say how they want to change this budget. And that would go for anything. That would be to say, take out the money for the scout hall or put in money for transportation or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, that's not out of order at any time for a councillor to do that. I would suggest, and I do this in the spirit of offering leadership to council, not in the spirit of how I think this issue should go, but I would suggest that it might be premature to do that at this point of the budget process, in that we still haven't seen operational. We still haven't seen, you know, how that whole thing comes together and what the levy impact is gonna be on residents. We haven't seen what the component of, assessment growth is gonna be that we're gonna see. So, but procedurally, it's not out of order if anybody wants to do it at any point in time, to say, I want to direct a change in that budget. But I would suggest that it would be better that we sort of each keep our own little lists of things that we might want to consider later. See how looks like when we get operational, what it looks like when we get the assessment growth, where we're all at. You'll have a better reading then of what your fellow councilors are thinking. And at that point then, might be the time to say, I would like to suggest this or that change. But to clarify, that's just my suggestion of how this would go. It is not out of order at any point for any one of you to put forward a change to the budget. I'm trying to thread the needle there of advice to council how they go forward without me saying how I think you should go forward with it. So I'll leave it there.
So maybe Steve, if you can comment though, like these 4 road construction projects, well, and there's 2 sidewalk replacements as well, but mainly focusing on the 4. Again, coming back to our discussions in September, do you look at that as these are just, you're just putting out the fires that are, you know, in such degradation that they need to be replaced or upgraded or maintained in a certain way? Or, you know, from a capital standpoint, does this 2024 draft capital budget take care of the current like needs that we have right now? Obviously, you could go and pave everything right now. There's justification, but you know what I'm getting at. Like, does this represent a true reflection of what we should be doing next year?
This represents a medium. What I'd like to do when I present a draft budget plan to the treasurer, it's all the bells and whistles, right? That doesn't always make it to this level, unfortunately. My tenure, usually, I try to keep as healthy as possible to move to accelerate these projects as fast as we can. I'm always stretching how much I'm allowed to spend, but that's my job, and it's the treasurer's job to tell me how much I can spend. So, yes, to say this is this tenure, and especially 2024, was mostly impacted in last year's budget. With the increase of costs that happened last year, if you went back and looked at what 2024 did look like, I had all 3 sections of Road 78 in there. Of course, the Road 98 project wasn't proposed at that point, but so yes, I mean, things do get thinned out a little bit for 2024, but still, with the increases, I think we're still staying on a fairly good track with what we have to work with. Could it be enhanced? Absolutely. But I mean, we're not going to be able to do that in 1 year. We're not going to be able to do that in 2 years. It takes time to build that funding because the projects are such a large number to be able to move forward at an accelerated rate.
And Steve, you just mentioned the Road 98. That's just, the bulk of that is done. Is the money in there? That's just for the second layer of pavement and line painting and shouldering, right?
That's correct, yes.
So we have no choice on that one. We're halfway through the project.
Yeah, and you'll see in the 10-year budget, we have some other joint projects with the town of Ingersoll coming up, and they're expensive, right? So, I mean, it's just a responsibility we have as being neighbors that these projects are planned. It's good that Ingersoll has given us lots of warning on these, so we can put them in the budget. It just slows down our own plans on moving forward with what we have on our road network. So, that's just part of it.
Yeah, and we expect, when we identify, like maybe Cobble Hills Road, when we approach other
100%.
municipalities, that they're not going to turn their back on us, that they're going to work with us.
And that's exactly right. I reached out to Temp Center about Cobble Hills this year. They couldn't give me a definite answer before I presented this. I put it in there at a certain year. They may say they can do it sooner than that, then I'll have to do some moving around on other projects to make that fit. And that's the problem with boundary road projects, right? You have to kind of work together and see where it both fits in both of our budgets and make them work.
Okay. There's no other questions. Thank you, Steve. We'll go on to the last component of the this capital budget for this year is our debenture payments. And as you'll see, they all come from the tax levy, but our ZMF facility, part of the debenture will also be coming from reserves as outlined in a resolution from council earlier this year. Okay? Yes.
Okay, that resolution, we had really good debate about that, and Kevin came up with a great idea, was that we had put that money into the SWIFT reserve, and then over the years it appeared that there was nothing to use that money for because of provincial changes to how that program was all working. So we decided to use it to cut down some of the interest payments on the ZMF, which had escalated from what we initially planned because of the delays in getting it done and the interest rates. All those things were completely out of our control, and we dealt with it. So it was the SWIFT reserve. What's it known as now?
Infrastructure projects.
Okay, infrastructure project. And there's 250,000 in there for 24, there's 250,000 for 25, and then from then until I think 32, there's a declining amount because our payments are going to be lower, so we don't need to adjust them as much. Is there enough money in that infrastructure reserve to make all those payments without us having to transfer tax dollars into that reserve to maintain it?
Yes, there is enough money in that reserve, but annually, we're continuing to put monies into that reserve as we have in the past to still fund it. And the idea to fund that reserve is for future projects that council may have an opportunity if something comes up that council may be able to explore, and we have the funds to be able to do that. So we are continuing to put money in that fund from taxation, the transfer to reserves, and so there is enough money then to fund this debenture.
So if we switch to the next page, it shows the reserve.
Yes.
That reserve is infrastructure projects,
That's correct.
which would have a value of 800,000, and then
Yep.
it kind of bounces up and down.
Mm-hmm.
How much are we budgeting on an annual basis to put into the, and I apologize, I didn't ask you this one ahead, but it just kind of flows with the.
So we're we're currently 175, and every year I'm adding a cost of living increase to it. So 2024, it's 180,000, and it keeps going up like that.
And that's budgeted into this whole
That's-
capital.
That's
That
correct.
we're putting 175. So even though we're taking out of that to cushion the interest, the debenture payments, that reserve will not be totally depleted at any point.
That's correct.
And if we need it for internet, or if we need it for something else, it'll still be there in 10 years' time.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good to know.
And that reserve, I'm getting mixed up with the names a little bit, but that is different than the infrastructure or project reserve that we're putting away a much larger amount of money to fund upcoming projects. It's still going to be earmarked as a separate reserve? Okay.
Okay, so while we're on this schedule, this is a great schedule to let us know over the years how our reserves are going to be impacted by the various transfers in from the tax levy and transfers out toward the various capital projects over the 10 years. And as you can see, there is lines that we will be short on a few areas that we're not putting enough funding in. Fire vehicles, we're finding that due to the increased cost of them, we will have a need to increase that particular reserve, or we have to extend that life of that vehicle, or look at a different strategy that we may need to look at these vehicles. And that's something that we're in the process of discussing and looking at different ways of how we can handle that large increase. We're looking at facilities because now we have established that reserve. There really hasn't been any funds there yet. but we have large dollars that need to go out to help fund capital repairs on these facilities. So we will see a deficit over the years. What the large one in 2027 is due to the potential renovation at the Embro Fire Hall, and also potential project may be coming up where we can be a partnership and help out with additional facilities with the school board at that. So that could be a large impact to us. So the idea is that if we have the potential Embro Public Works building, and that it's empty right now, that when it goes time to sell it, we fund this reserve for future facilities and capital needs, okay? So this is a great tool for us to look at and judge how we are faring with our projects and how we'll be able to fund them, okay?
Along that line, I completely agree that the money from the public works should go into, this is the where it should go. And that also drives home the importance that we maximize the return on that property, however we end up. We gotta maximize them on two ways. We gotta maximize on the return to the community as far as whatever facility gets built there, but we also have to maximize the financial return to the township, same as we maximize the financial return on the Maple Leaf property, which has allowed us to do some really interesting things. The numbers that are in that facility reserve, is it safe to say that they do not include that infusion of public works money?
The debenture?
No, the revenue that we get, because we don't know what the revenue.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So that where we're looking at in 2027, a 1.7 million. If we inject 1.5 million or 2 million from the public works, that's going to make that picture a lot different and make what we want to do possible, because what we want to do is impossible with those numbers right now.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. And we'll go to the next one. I think that's, yeah. So now the other documents that are in the budget, your budget package, is just the continuation of the other 9 years for council's information, so that you can see the detail about those other years. But currently, right now, we've just gone through the 2024, and if there's any other questions that council may have, staff are happy to address them.
Okay, the first page there, it shows, and all the ensuing pages show an input of revenue of $260,000 from gas tax, 2023 and all the years subsequent, except for next year. So why is there no revenue for gas tax for next year?
So the 2023, we will be borrowing from 2024's gas tax to help fund that bridge, the bridge that is currently, we're over. And so we will, any funding that we will get from gas tax is going to go back against that one that we borrowed.
So we've already committed it
Yeah.
because of the emergency that when we, instead of repairing the bridge, we had to replace the bridge. We made the decision to max out our credit card on that one.
That's correct.
Anyone else? General questions at this point? Councilor Mitchell?
Kind of a summary question back to the very start of the report, which was page 1 of the first part of the report was, said without transferring, so my question is, without transferring the $574,080 from the capital levy reserve to the tax levy, that total would have been $966,595, which would have been a 9.3% increase instead of 3.79. So it's basic math question. Is my math right? By putting that money in there, we make a reasonable, right now, comparable to the inflation rate increase rather than an increase of 3 times the inflation rate.
Correct.
And my last question, on page 21, the chart that shows that 574,000 coming out of the infrastructure levy, that, and there's a little bit confused, was in my mind, there was different names for the same thing. So the infrastructure levy is exactly the same thing as the capital levy?
Correct.
Okay. And we used a bunch of it last year. We're gonna wipe it out, or we used a bunch of it in this year's budget. We're gonna wipe it out in next year's budget so that we don't do 3 times inflation rate.
Correct.
Where did that money come from originally?
Originally, it was established in 2026 with a transfer from reserve of a lump sum of like 400,000. And then over the years, there has been prior surpluses that have also gone into that account. And then over the years, it's been utilized to help fund the tax, to bring down the tax levy requirement. Also, there was a one-time grant from MMAH for another 580,000. And so going forward, our reserve policy has changed the structure of the need of that fund. Instead, we're putting all surpluses to the department instead of to just that particular levy. So that department can utilize that surplus to help them for any future needs within their department.
So if memory serves, and this was definitely before Diane was here, this used to be called a tax stabilization reserve, I think it was. And that was the very beginnings of trying to put away money in reserves to smooth out some of these projects it was in a relatively simple way compared to what's being put in front of us now. But it was the beginnings of that kind of idea of when there was a surplus to put it there and so smooth out the peaks and valleys in capital expenditures over years, but has morphed since then.
And if I remember correctly, the second budget the 3 of us worked on, I made the proposal that we pull some money out of that reserve, and that was, oh no, we can never take money out of reserve to reduce tax increases. That's just not how it's done. And now we've gone from that first step to really using what we've got to make a tax bill that's reasonable considering all the restrictions.
And I think the key difference here is that the budget process or methodology that's being put in front of us now is not only pulling out of that reserve, but a consistent way to actually fund that reserve so that it is there to be pulled out, right? I think that's the methodology that's in front of us today. So.
And no more questions, but just a couple comments. First of all, I want to thank Diane. I had, I think, 16 questions that I sent her, and she sent them all back, and we did our usual routine that I asked the questions, we got the answers, the additional answers from staff. I really appreciate all the information that everybody has given us. I think it's made for a great input into a very difficult budgeting process. I'm fully in support of moving to capital budgeting not only earlier, we've already seen the benefit by getting out there and getting our RFPs out 2 or 3 months ahead of other municipalities. But I'm also a big fan of financing this all through reserves rather than trying to dig up money on a year-to-year basis. We'll get some from here and some from there, and we'll pull some from reserve. I think that's just a much better business model to do things. It's more of the way private business works. And then there's the argument that a municipality shouldn't work as a private business. I'm a big fan of private business. I think what it comes down to is the budgeting process is proactive as opposed to reactive. And that's the way we should be doing it. So thanks to Diane and everybody else that put input into this. And it's not an easy process, but I think it's the way we should do things. And I just wanted to make that at this stage.
Anyone else? Yeah, Deputy Mayor Grady.
So I have a couple of questions that sort of span some various portions of the budget. So I've waited till the end. Some of what I wanted to pull was from this last dozen or so slides going through the 10-year capital. It's a great way, you know, it's not what we're passing, it's what we're endorsing, but it's a great way for us to see some of what our staff are envisioning. Because of some of the tools like the roads needs study, we're seeing roads projects that are being projected through Public Works. In recreation, what we're seeing a lot of is what we anticipate being the requirements to keep our facilities as they are, operating at the service level that they're currently delivering. What I'm also seeing is there's a little bit of flexibility built in there where with recreation, the needs of the community as it changes and recreation as it shifts how it serves the community, there will be always some discussions about enhancements or different directions within recreation. So it's great to see that sort of, I think, reflected in the 10-year capital plan. But some of those line items within, and I'm thinking specifically about the TDRC because we have had preliminary discussions that acknowledge the imminent redevelopment of that, which we don't know if we're 7 years out or 20 years out, but we know that we're definitely getting closer. So some of those, you know, significant expenditures, they're not necessarily, you know, if they're 10 years out, they may not be the projects that we're actually realizing, but that's going to be part of the information that we're using to help us drive our decision of when redevelopment is actually the best financial position for the municipality. So seeing some of those big ticket number items starting to come closer, you know, pushes that conversation, I think, more to the forefront. The other thing I think that, you know, staff are earmarking those, but as we get closer, if we know we're only 3 years out from redevelopment, some of those upgrades will not actually take place. They're upgrades that would need to take place if we were not having that redevelopment happen. So, you know, my first comment is the discussions around redevelopment, I believe, started with last year's budget, including a recreational needs study that was in as a $21,000 line item for 2023. I recognize that there was some projects that did not happen in last year's capital budget. I know that staff are working to get caught up on some things that we didn't get done. Some of these things are going to happen moving forward. We also had a TDRC park design and engineering. That's for the park space that is behind the TDRC, and it was in at $15,000. I know there are some drainage concerns there. Separately, I know through the asset management requirements, there's building condition assessments that are taking place, and some of the work plan for how we were going to be evaluating the needs of the structure, the physical needs of the operation of the structure versus the community needs or aspirations or council's aspirations for what that structure could pose. I think we've come into a place where there is some overlap between the work we intended to do and the work that we have to do and that we are doing. Back to budget discussions, some of what I'm seeing in the 2024 budget, like the drainage. So the drainage for TDRC was in last year. We moved to defer it to this year, pending further discussions on plans for the facility. So it is a concern. We acknowledged it as a concern, but it's a concern that at what cost are we willing to fix it? At what lifespan of this building do we still have? So my intention was that at this time of year, we would be able to have that information in front of us to help have an understanding of the value of that investment in some of these TDRC pieces. We're not there now, but we know we're moving in that direction where we will have that information. So I anticipate moving to defer that an additional year. I don't like removing it because it's an important discussion to have, and I don't want it to fall off our radar. But until we know what the plans are for that building, if that building's going to come down in 7 years, you know, some of these things in here maybe aren't as needed, but at this point, staff, I would expect are only going to bring us a budget that shows what's needed for this. The only other piece in there was the office renovation, and it's a small price point at $6,000, and it's not, my intention isn't to get into telling staff, you know, what are you going to do with this office space or what's the specific renovation. My intention is to have a discussion around the tools that we're using in terms of budgeting, to have an understanding of when we're going to redevelop, if we're going to redevelop, what that could look like, so that we have an understanding of whether or not we're making investments that are worthwhile for our residents in the short term versus, more sustainable long-term investments. So in terms of a question, I wanted to just put that on council's radar because as we move forward with these discussions with this budget, this is going to be something that I'm circling back to. As well as, sorry, the one piece I was missing there was the MOU. So we also have the potential to do a co-build with Oxford County Library and the Thames Valley District School Board and the municipality. So those were very broad discussions that we're going to be working forward to narrow and see if there's a potential there for us. And that's also going to impact how we look at redevelopment. But in terms of the Recreation Center Needs Study or TDC Park Design and Engineering, is there any plans for any of that work to be proceeding in this year? Has it been? That's my official, like, you're done. Someone in the back has a clicker. They're like, that's 15 minutes. Are those still going to happen? Are they being captured by the new processes? And is there direction that council needs to give so that this time next year we have better tools similar to the roads needs study, that we have better tools in having an understanding of the anticipated redevelopment scheduling?
Perhaps I'll start and I'll have the CEO kind of finish. So I've been tasked with getting some cost estimates to do some of those initial reviews in terms of the redevelopment of the site. So just some preliminary costing. I do believe that the monies that were allocated for, I'm not sure what originally it was priced for, but we are using those monies on the building condition assessments for this year. And you're right, like there's some moving pieces here, right? So with that information that's coming back that will help our asset management plan, it'll also better inform council and staff in terms of what are those assets, pieces that will need to be replaced, whether it's short-term or long-term. So that's going to help kind of paint the picture as well. So from the work that I'm doing, that's what I'm working on, but maybe I'll leave it to the CEO to respond to the larger question.
So I think looking at it from the holistic point of view is we need to determine whether that site can accommodate a new arena or what scope that arena would entail. If we do the co-build with the school, then the footprint becomes substantially smaller because we wouldn't need a gym facility at TDRC. So we know that that is moving forward to a certain point. I think we're confident enough that we can go ahead with the work on that site to see what we can fit there. That will drive whatever council has to do, because if we need to purchase land outside of the serviced village area, then that's going to be extremely expensive and will add to the cost. If we can redevelop on site, we would then have to put a plan in place where existing users to see how we could house them, what we could do with them. So there's lots going on, but I think that will at least give us a start to see what we can put on that site.
Anyone else? Deputy Mayor Grigg.
Promise brief this time. I read the first paragraph of this budget, and in my little comments part, I put first paragraph in all caps, dreams are coming true. This is, I think, something that we've had lots of discussions about, how we best sit in these seats and how we best give our input to help develop a really healthy budget. Staff do all the work. We come in here to bring the perspectives that we hold based on our experiences in our community. And this is just such a promising, exciting way of looking at budgeting. And I think it resolves a lot of the concerns we've had in the past. I think it removes a lot of the constraints that we've come up against. And even this previous discussion around the intention of that tax stabilization reserve, it was a tool intended to have the impact that this budget is truly having. and it in itself was very restricted, where this is just incredible. I understand asset management is requiring that we move in this direction, but the speed in which you've transitioned us into this new funding model, I hope it's also, I anticipate it's being felt by staff as well. We had conversations around scheduling of roads projects and how to manage those dips and valleys in terms of when you're doing those expensive works. I don't want staff to ever prioritize a project based on having to smooth those. That's the reserves jobs to do, and staff get the opportunity to do the work on the right roads at the right time for residents. So I may be a big municipal, what's the appropriate terminology, geek with this here, but this was incredibly exciting agenda to read because of this budget. So I think probably I'm not the only one, maybe not the same tap shoes on, but this was just, thank you very much.
Anyone else? 4 points now that I want to make. First of all, I want to point out that's possibly the single most courageous political thing I can ever imagine, is asking the rest of council what term they would use to describe me. Second one, just want to point out to staff, in one of the first slides in this presentation, it points out that this budget was constructed using notable tools, information, and methodologies. And I think you've heard from the debate today, the comments, questions from council today, that I think we are interested if there are any recommendations from staff in any department about are there other notable tools and methodologies that we should put in place that I think this council generally has an appetite for. We would like to set policy and then see budgets that are constructed to deliver on that policy. So I think I love to see that line in there, and I just wanted to express that I think I'm not out of line with council here, that we would like, if there's further recommendations on that, we would like to hear those going forward for other years. Third thing is absolutely have the same tap shoes on as Deputy Mayor Gregg with respect to this budget. Every year that we've got a budget in the last few years, I am impressed again with how we are moving it to another level of budgeting and financing. And I think there's always a temptation for councillors to say, I'm going to save money on the tax levy by, cutting this project or deferring this project. And you can. That's not a lie to say you can do that. But this is how you actually save money on the tax levy, is by actually financing, as Councillor Mitchell said earlier, financing it appropriately in the long term. It's not as appealing maybe to residents as to say, I cut that thing out and your taxes are lower, but it's actually more effective at actually making their taxes lower. So this budget methodology, I don't want to oversell this because we haven't passed the budget yet. But in terms of a starting point, this is fantastic starting point for council, to have that reliable funding methodology of we're going to fund reserves and we're going to draw from reserves and responsibly fund the right projects in the right way. The fourth thing is, I just want to say, and this is again in the context, I hope, of offering leadership to council. Budget deliberations are always challenging, and in various municipalities when you watch them, it can be really challenging. So I say this as encouragement for the rest of the budget process, but the quality of the analysis of this council, of this excellent budget today, the questions, the comments, the direction, is astounding to me compared to other councils that I've observed, right? In that the analysis that you guys have brought to this, again, excellent budget, is exactly the way that it should be done in terms of, how are we going to fund the service level that we want our residents to experience, as opposed to sort of a bickering over pet projects and cutting and slashing and things like that. And I think, so regardless of how this budget turns out, I think the way you've all approached analyzing it and what we do with it is the constructive way to go forward, wherever it ends up. That's the constructive way to go forward with it. So I know we haven't passed the budget yet, so I don't want it I'm not buttering you all up for what a great job you've done, because you haven't done it yet. We haven't done it yet, but I say it by way of wanting to encourage you to keep bringing that methodology to this. Like, our staff have put an excellent budget in front of us, an excellent method of building a budget in front of us, and we need to continue analyzing it the way that you guys have so far, because that's how we're going to get to not only the best 2024 budget and tax levy, but 10-year, budgeting, and the councils that will come after us and how they're going to deliver. Because again, when I'm not in this chair, when none of us is in this chair, there's still gonna be residents here driving down that road to go to hockey and have a bad day and need to be pulled out of a ditch. And so all this still needs to happen, and we need to set that budget template now going forward. So, so far, so good. Anyone else before I read the motion? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2023-137 from the Director of Finance be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried, and we're going to take a break for lunch. 12:30, and I'll call the meeting back to order, and we are at 8.6 Corporate Services Department. 8.6A is Report 2023-140 from the Chief Administrative Officer regarding 2024 Pay Administration Policy Salary Grid Adjustment. Don, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
No, I would leave it open for questions.
Questions from council on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, the policy to increase wages annually based on the CPI is a sound one. I'm glad that we adopted that, so it's just fair that our employees get the cost of living increase. Otherwise, we're asking them to work for less next year than they made this year when it comes to their income versus their spending ability. But also in the report, you talk about the salary band increases from steps 1 to 5, I believe it was. And that on average is a 3.7% increase, which employees earn by their performance and their years of experience, and certainly deserve it. But we've hired a lot of people in the last 5 years, so do we have a number of how many employees, in addition to the 3.6%, will be getting potentially a 3.7% increase?
I will look to the Director of Finance for that answer.
I did just a really quick rough estimate, and the majority of staff are still at job rate. So there's only a handful that would be seeing that increase. So maybe I would say 5, 6 roughly.
Because the reason I ask is I was interested in the impact on budget. If we've got 15 people that are going to get a 3.7 on top, not unless I say they certainly deserve it, that's the policy, but it would have an impact. But if it's only a handful, then it won't. So thanks for that information.
Any other questions on this report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-140 from the Chief Administrative Officer be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Corporate Services Department 8.6B, report number 2023-128 from the Director of Corporate Services regarding an ARU process update. Karen, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Nothing in particular, just wanted to note that county planning will be providing an updated report regarding ARUs as well in the new year with more focus on the actual zoning and those details. That's it.
Questions from Councillor Stewart?
I think it was in the last meeting we were talking about whether in the planning committee, was there 2 other rural municipalities who had adopted ARUs in rural zonings? And I guess just really looking for, I'm hoping that county feedback that comes back sort of maybe gets their comments captured as well as some of the challenges we've had as well.
So I believe, and Spencer might have to correct me, but I believe by the time the new year comes, the area municipalities will all have the zoning in place for ARUs, correct? In rural, sorry.
Yes, all the rules should have it in place. I think Tilsonburg and Woodstock are the 2 that we're waiting on now. So I think all of the rules have it now in place.
Sorry, to clarify, I'm saying outside of service villages, in rural areas, not just, yeah, like hoping that the county can bring, because we've had some applications come in, and they've obviously had their challenges, and if we can make sure that when county comes back with their sort of consolidated ARU report in the early new year, that it talks about maybe some of those other municipalities that have had applications in rural zonings.
Yeah, through the mayor, I think that's exactly the intent behind this follow-up report is it will look at those specific details, saying what types of applications have we received, what type of inquiries have we been getting, what have been some of the potential challenges for folks who are outside of a service settlement area and want, for example, a detached ARU. So I think it will look exactly at those kind of items.
Any other questions on this report? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that report 2023-128 from the Director of Corporate Services be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And correspondence requiring direction. So the one item here is 9A, correspondence from Oxford County regarding Conservation Authority service agreements. Spencer, could you, is there anything you want to highlight in that for council before I ask them for questions on this?
Nothing to highlight, but I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Questions from council on this? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that item 9A be received and filed for information purposes, and that Zorra Council advise the county that the township supports entering into MOU agreements with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority and the Grand River Conservation Authority for programs and services as outlined in Oxford County Report CP 2023-359. Councillor Mitchell is the mover. Do you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, I've talked multiple times in my Upper Thames reports about the changes in legislation and as to dividing up how services are provided into the 3 different categories. Part of the requirement was that under the category 2 and 3, that the conservation authorities have memorandums of understanding with municipalities to provide services that are not mandatory. This is the contract that's been drawn up between County of Oxford and the Upper Thames Conservation Authority. Oxford is unique within the authority that the upper tier taxes or pays the municipal levy, and all that the county is asking for is that the municipalities, of which Zorra, as far as land, is the largest, that we support entering into this this agreement for the 3 services that are outlined in the agreement.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 10, boards and committees. So I have here a motion to receive and file A and B. Before I ask Paul for his update on UTRCA, is there anybody wants to do anything other than receive and file A and B? Not seeing. So then I'll turn it over to you, Paul, for your UTRCA update before I read the motions.
Okay, the October meeting of the Upper Thames Board was yesterday. We started out with a healthy 2-hour discussion about budgets, so I was well warmed up for budget discussion. The round figure numbers on the 2024 draft budget for the Upper Thames are total costs of $23 million, self-generated revenue of a little under $8 million. The municipal levy would be $7.4 million, and the Category 3 agreements, which we kind of just talked about, the revenue from that would be a little over $600,000, and the deficit on the operating budget, which upper conservation authorities are, unlike municipalities, are allowed to run deficit budgets. The deficit at this point is $912,000. On the capital side, total projects are just a little under $3.8 million, of which a municipal levy would be almost $1.7 million, and other funding of $672,000. And most of that funding is through WECI, which is the provincial funding for flood control structures, for a total deficit of $1.4 million. So deficits on both ends. Much of the discussion is how much do we pass on to municipalities in increased levy. Upper Thames is traditionally, unlike a lot of other CAs, has buffered the levy by using self-generated income. Basically 40% of the income that the Upper Thames has is self-generated. A lot of CAs, the levy is 80% of what goes towards operating costs. As far as the capital end of it. Most of that cost goes against municipalities that benefit from flood control. For example, any work that's done on Wildwood, the benefit municipalities are St. Mary's and London on that. So if there's work done on Wildwood, Oxford County doesn't pay on the capital end of it. So excellent discussion. As far as Zorra Township, we're still budgeted to put in our 15,000 towards Harrington and Embro Dam. It goes in the kitty for maintenance of those two, and that number has not changed in the last 5 years. We received an update on watershed-based management strategy. Rest of the stuff was just generally reports of not a whole lot of interest, but we do have the Upper Thames still owns 4 houses, and they are rented out from 3 of them in the range of 752 to 788, and there's one house that pays $124 a month rent. So I don't know what that house looks like, but that's why the Upper Thames would like to get out of the rental business. But much as our meeting, it was totally dominated by budget discussion. Budget will come back in January for final look at, and then it will be adopted at the general annual meeting in February.
Questions on that update? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Greg, that items 10A and B be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And information items, I have a motion here to receive and file 11A through F. Does anybody want to do anything different than that? Is there any questions or comments on any of the items 11A through F? I will just say item 11A is the correspondence that I did send to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing following, I think it was our last council meeting where it was on as an information item, and this council didn't do anything with it. I did seriously consider not sending it. I don't like that it was asked of the mayor only, of the head of council only, and not of council. But in the end, you know, was it right or wrong? But ultimately, I decided I wanted to give the input. I thought there should be a record of what somebody from here thought about it, so I submitted it. And so then I asked staff to put it on here so you could see what I submitted. It is what it is now, but there you go. That's what it is. And so nothing else on any of these other items. Moved by Greg, seconded by Stewart, that items 11A through F be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And no unfinished business, no notices of motion, no bylaws. That's weird. Yeah, right. So items of community interest and the calendar. So we are today at November 1st. Snow. I don't know about everybody else, but I had snow at my eye. I cleared snow off my car this morning. Tomorrow we have emergency management exercise here at 9 o'clock in the morning. Chief? Yeah. And then, what am I seeing here? Remembrance Day services at the TDRC on Sunday at 10:30 that you're attending, Katie, and also here for the Ingersoll and Beachville Legions, and you're attending that one as well at 2. Thank you. And then anybody put their hand up while I'm looking here if you got something. Councilor Finch.
Tonight is the Heritage Committee meeting and the Beachville Museum, 7 p.m. November 4th is the Heart of Oxford at the Oxford Auditorium in Woodstock from 10 to 8. On the 4th as well, out in Embro, the Agricultural Society is doing their spaghetti dinner at 5 p.m. at the Embro Arena. On November 11th, the U13 Embro Edge hockey team is doing the can and bottle drive at the Embro Arena from 1 to 4. And November 12th, the 4th annual Harrington Holiday Market will be at the Harrington Hall, 11/4.
So you're going to do the calendar from now on,
And, oh, I'm not done.
proving my point.
And we do have the 2 plays in Tempsford and Embro as well. What dates are those? November, well, there's a bunch of them in November.
Thank you. Councilor Mitchell.
Tonight, at 7:30 is the Wisdom Wednesday at Brown Schoolhouse. The speaker is Alexandra Stevens. She's a member of the Canadian Dragon Boat team. On Sunday, November the 5th, Remembrance Day ceremonies in Lakeside at 10:30 a.m., and I'll be attending on behalf of the township. And you mentioned the holiday market on Sunday the 12th. And on Monday, November the 13th, HACA is having their meeting, but they're making it a public meeting, hoping that some other people come out and put in input, community input as to what HACA goals and objectives should be going forward.
I'm not sure if I missed it in your list, Crystal. Embro Legion Remembrance Day, 10 a.m. on the 11th? Okay. 10 yeah. 10 a.m. on the 11th at the park, and then usually over for chili afterwards at the Legion.
Just getting notice from Derek Collins, Tempsford Lions Club member Derek Collins, that there's a pork chop, smoked barbecue pork chop, baked beans, mashed potatoes, fresh bun, dessert, all the fixins dinner on Saturday, November 4th from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. Pickup is at the Beatty Room. To place your order, there's a phone call that you can make or a Google Doc, and that's available on their Facebook page. That's Saturday the 4th. You hadn't heard about it?
No.
Call Ron, 519-285-3795. All the fixins.
Anything else, calendar or items of community interest?
There will be a Legion brunch in Embro at some point in November, but there isn't a date yet. So keep your eyes open for that.
Keep the 18th open for the ZenMap open house. Okay, good.
I have one more. The Thursday, November 9th, we'll be hosting 2 of our 3 schools here at council chambers for some conversation with, I think, senior management team members and the mayor. Yeah.
Anything else? Yeah. All right. Then I have moved by Stuart, seconded by Greg, that council move into closed meeting session at, actually, hold on a second, just before we do that. We have nothing after that other than confirmatory, right? So for anybody watching online, I'm going to suggest that we don't even go back live afterwards. There's nothing on the agenda after the closed session other than the confirmatory bylaw and adjournment. So anybody watching the video now, we can stop because we're about to go into closed and there's nothing else to see. So moved by Stuart, seconded by Greg, that council move into closed meeting session at 12:50 p.m. pursuant to section 239.2B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, and section 239.2C. Any discussion?